So hi, everyone. And I'm very delighted to be here with you, Cece, and thank you for all the work that you do twice a month with these incredible webinars. And I learn more each time. You given, you think some of it's the same, but it's never the same. It's always different. Some of it is the same, but the fact that you give it live each time is such a gift. And you're such a gift in my life. And I consider you a really a leader in this movement because you just keep going. You just keep chipping away and you just keep doing what you're doing. And it gives me so much encouragement. I hope it gives everyone else encouragement too. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this today. And
you're welcome, Sidnee. And right back at you. You've been working so hard out in California too. Why don't you tell us how you got involved in this real quick and what you've been up to in your area of California?
Well, I think I've mentioned this before, that it started with my husband, and he and I were going to the end of Long Island where there was really bad self-service. This is back in 2012, I think. Well, 14, something 13. And he had really great blood sugar. He's diabetic and his blood sugar was really low there. Always great readings. But yet here in California, it was always between, 90, 100, 110, 115. He tries to keep it around 80. And so I said, what's different about where we live and where it is on the end of Long Island, where there's no self-service? And so I bought my first meter to take readings. And I realized, oh my goodness, look at all this radiation all around us. And then I would go into people's houses or my friends and say, look at the radiation. And it's, become very popular when you do that because you're annoying people, you're trying to alarm them. Wait a minute, I thought everything was good. So that's how I got started. One thing led to another. I ended up getting more meters and actually became an advocate for people and helping them. I'm not a building biologist, but I love meters. And I love taking all my different meters and showing people how they can be safe just because I've learned from you. So, hard wiring and all that, distance, all that. So that's how I got involved and that's how I help. And I help people with cell towers also. We attend a lot of planning commission meetings, a lot of city council meetings. We gather, I do flyers, I petition neighborhoods because I'm passionate about this. And I also have worked in schools and helped mitigate schools too.
Yeah, and you're a retired school teacher, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I keep learning from you every time we talk too, because we're all just doing what we can do from where we are. And that's really the message for tonight. It's not no technology, it's safe technology. And we'll present the science tonight. We'll present what the risks are, what's happening in public policy, what's happening in the courts, and most importantly, what we can each do today to have safer technology. And then as we muster up the courage, what we can do to help our communities, as Sidnee and I have been doing for far too many years now. So I'm going to go ahead and I will start a screen share in just a moment. And we'll spend the next hour and a half going through my presentation in it. And then at the end, we will go ahead and do question and answer. Sidnee will monitor the chat throughout. And if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll address them at the end. So I'm going to bring up my slides. Okay, Sidnee, can you give me a nod when you can see my slides?
Okay, not yet.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yep.
Okay, good. All right. So after today, we will send out my slides as well as today's recording so that you can go back and reference it or you can share. And everywhere that we go in my slides where there's an underline, that will take you to the backup materials so that you can look at the deep dive a little bit easier. So this MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing at Northeastern University. And I also earned my undergrad degree there in communication studies. And Never imagined this is what I'd be using my skill set for, but I'm honored to have that skill set to be able to present information, hopefully in a way that folks can digest. So I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue back in 2013. And I had been running our local education foundation for a few years at the time when the wireless industry had come into all of our communities. And even at the state level, had started saying that our kids were going to need to have all this new technology to be able to succeed in the world. And our little town of Ashland, Massachusetts, didn't have budget for that. So, good doobie parents, we stepped up and started doing fundraising to get wireless infrastructure in our schools, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smartboards and minis and what we thought was all this great new technology. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer shared with us that she was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman and was learning that there are biological effects to the radiation that's used to carry our signals and data back and forth. And well, it was book group, so I just made a mental note of it and didn't think too much about it until not long after that, something else crossed my desk that indicated the same thing, that there's harm from wireless radiation. And it was from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. These are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that regular doctors haven't been trained on. And they had issued in 2012 a position statement indicating that our schools should not put wireless technology in, stay with hardwired technology. So I thought, wow, maybe I really ought to look at this. So being a technical writer, I just thought, is there any science to this? And I was just astounded to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing extensive biological harm. And we're going to walk you through the science in just a few minutes. So this was not an easy conversation to have with my schools because we'd all bought into it and we had spent a lot of money getting wireless systems and equipment into our schools. But when I started sharing the facts, we became the first public school district in the United States to even have best practices for mobile devices with this little sign hanging in all of our classrooms that advises us to turn off wireless devices when they're not in use. Only turn the Wi-Fi on when you need it. Don't leave those routers pulsating 24/7. And always place the mobile device on a solid surface, not on your body. And we'll tell you more about that tonight too. So I realized though that this was just a sign hanging in our classrooms. They weren't enforcing it. So I went and I met with my legislators, and I had the privilege of serving alongside Senator Karen Spilka when I was running the Education Foundation, and she's now our Senate president here in Massachusetts. And I met with her during local coffee hours and I showed her the science. I showed her Ashland's little sign. And by then I was able to measure this invisible toxin of wireless radiation. And when I showed her how much radiation came off of her cell phone and her district director's laptop, they both were looking at me with, deer in the headlight eyes going, really? And I said, yes. And nobody knows. This is much like the Big Tobacco Playbook, where we've now got this whole technology in our society that's causing great harm and nobody knows. So Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office. At the time, she was the chairwoman of our Senate Ways and Means Committee. And we whittled together a little bill that would form a commission at the state level, bring the right minds together, look at this issue, and then decide what to do. So we started with that legislation back in 2015, and we have had bills now for the last 10 years, one even longer, to address utility smart meters. But in Massachusetts, we have gotten them out of committee favorably, but they've never been enacted into law. We did have the good fortune of having a really good legislator up in New Hampshire. And as we'll see a little later, we had some really meaningful progress up in New Hampshire. When I was doing this work with my schools in my state, somebody in Europe saw my work and, or somebody reached out to Dr. Deborah Davis, who founded something called the Environmental Health Trust. Now, Dr. Deborah Davis is one of our world's leading scientists, certainly one of the top scientists here in the United States. And she didn't know about this issue until her little grandson, who was just a toddler, could pick up a cell phone, get into it, and keep himself occupied for extended lengths of time. And she's like, wow, well, isn't he smart? And then she thought, but what do we really know about that? So she started doing her investigation, and like she helped to get cigarette smoke out of airplanes. She worked on lead. She's worked on cancer. So she really has a breadth of experience. And she too was just thunderstruck at how much peer-reviewed science exists that doesn't get to mainstream public knowledge. So this couple over in the UK contacted Dr. Deborah Davis and said, can we please reference your Environmental Health Trust database in this course that we are developing to teach the public about wireless risks and safer technology solutions? And so she said, absolutely. And let me introduce you to this woman, Cece Doucette from Massachusetts. And she shared with them the inroads I was trying to make. So I met with Brett and Lynn West, and eventually Dr. Mikko Ahonen, who's one of the world's leading radiation scientists over in Finland. And the four of us hit it hard for about 6 months. And we came up with a little online course that can teach this in about a half an hour and then give you a certificate of completion so you can have your compliance, certificate for work, or a tip sheet at the end with handy reminders that you can hang on your fridge or hang in your office or hang up at the workroom or the lunchroom at school or your employer. So we have so many more resources today than we had a decade ago when I fell down the rabbit hole on this issue. Now, Dr. Davis from the Environmental Health Trust brought a panel of world-leading experts to the Massachusetts State House back in 2015 or 2016, asking for right-to-know legislation. Because just like with tobacco or smoking or gambling or pornography, all these addictive behaviors, we deserve a right to know, and we especially should be protecting our children. So Dr. Davis brought with her Dr. Sharma from India. It was his responsibility in the Indian government not only to do some of the studies, but also to make recommendations for the public radiation exposure limits. So India's limits were way up here, where our United States and Canada and England and Japan and other countries are still way up here. And India brought it down 90%, at least on paper. And it showed that with political will, we can make meaningful inroads here. So she brought Dr. Sharma. She brought Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And after some of the scientists approached him and measured the radiation in his home, he went and sought counsel from a dozen of the world's leading experts in this wireless radiation technology. And Frank Clegg came back and said, we are not safe here in North America. The Federal Communications Commission's guidelines do not protect us for health effects, nor do Canada's Safety Code 6 standards. So I was sitting there in the audience going, wow, we've got these world-leading scientists, we've got a captain of industry, and then we also had Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair, who's a healthcare practitioner. She's a psychologist, and she teaches all over the world. And she said, wherever she goes, she hears the same thing from kindergarten teachers, first grade, second grade, that these kids are coming to school expecting their teachers to be edutainers. They've lost their ability in many cases to focus, to concentrate, to have empathy. She was saying that the parts of the brain where math and science develop were still coming along on point, but the other side of the brain, where all our human characteristics are meant to be developing, are really suffering. She said children should not be in front of screens all day long. They should be outside playing under the rhododendron, going into deeper and deeper levels of imaginative play. That's what fires up the synapses in the brain development, not the shallows of a screen. So it was really eye-opening to be at our state house, listening to these world-leading experts telling us about the need to get a hold of our technology and learn to use it safely. From there, it was a standing room only presentation at the State House. They did another community one that night at a church out in Framingham, another standing room only. And from there, I met a lot of other people in Massachusetts, because for 2 years, I was the only person I knew who could talk about this issue. And honestly, way back then, I wasn't even sure what I knew, but I knew we had a problem because I had started reading the science. And so it was really wonderful that after going to these presentations, I connected with a bunch of other people in Massachusetts and found out that many people were already sick from this and could feel the radiation. Just like in fine cuisine, you will hire somebody who's got a super taster, extra something in their taste buds that make them really sought after. Well, these folks who become electromagnetically sensitive from today's wireless radiation and other forms of dirty electricity, they can sense this long before you and I or most others who've not hit that tipping point yet. So we eventually founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and we invite you to go out to our website and just look, keep learning. It's set up in a way where there's lots of white space. It's meant to be very calm because we don't want to be fear mongers. We want to be fact-based. But you can see what's happening at the state level with our Department of Public Health. You can see what's happening with Health and Human Services. You can see what's happening with the Department of Public Utilities, and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, all of whom have been informed on this. And then we also have a page for resources where you can quickly drill down into the science. We have a take action page, and we also have a news page where we capture local stories in the Massachusetts media, cable shows, radio programs, TV, print materials, online resources. There are a lot of people who know about this issue, but in the big mainstream media channels, they have conflicts of interest with the industry, so we don't hear about it through the big network channels. But you'll see many, many, many posts from around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on our news page. And then we also have an events page, and that's where you can always go to sign up for one of these free public education webinars like we're doing today. And as Sidnee said, people come back time and again. You know, they'll start addressing their concerns around this and then start making small changes and then come back and learn a little bit more, make a few more changes, come back and learn a little bit more. So we welcome you to come back as often as you like. And by all means, feel free to invite others to come with you because nobody else is going to come fix this for us. So as I say, there's no cavalry coming. We have to come up to speed on this, and then we have to do something if we want to have a healthy, safe society. This next link, somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked me to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. Now, these were experts from all over the country, from our federal agencies, our state agencies, from our hospitals, our architects, our doctors, our urban planners, all coming together to say, how do we create safe spaces indoors? And this was the first time that we got to talk about the wireless radiation issue. And it was news to most of these folks too. So I like to share this link because our talks were limited to about 8 to 10 minutes each. So if you want a highly credible, quick way to share this topic with somebody else, I recommend this. We had Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada. We had Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the world's leading researchers on this, Professor Emeritus from Washington State University. We had Peter Sullivan, and I found Peter Sullivan's work online through a lecture. He had two sons who were both on the autism spectrum by the time they came into the preschool years. And Peter had been a fighter pilot like Top Gun, where he's up with the Earth's, natural, really high electromagnetic fields up, in the stratosphere up there. And he also, being a fighter pilot, had radar all over his plane. And that's where this wireless technology came from. It is the same technology as radar that was developed for our militaries for warfare purposes. And then he was inside the cockpit with all the instrumentation panel that uses wireless signaling to communicate back to their own base stations on the ground. So Peter got huge doses of electromagnetic fields or electromagnetic radiation. And he started getting really sick. He dropped way too much weight. His teeth started getting brittle. And then when he was no longer a fighter pilot, he went to work in Silicon Valley as an engineer. So it was like his friends who invented cell phones. So he was way up there in technology. And he figured out that these wireless radiation signals were causing he and his children to become very injured. And for many people with a loved one on the autism spectrum, they will look at the diet, they will get all of the chemically grown foods out of the diet and go to organics. They may go so far as to detox the body from heavy metals. And Peter says, those are all really important measures, but he tells people today, first line of defense, do the digital detox. At least start with a sleep sanctuary in your home with no wireless radiation signals. And we're going to talk you through how to do that. So Peter came and joined our panel to talk about what we can do technologically to still stay connected, but also be protected. And we also had Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of Dr. Deborah Davis's Environmental Health Trust. And her talk was spent on what other countries are doing. Italy, some of the schools there have already taken out the wireless access points and routers because of the harm to the children. Israel, Belgium, pockets all over the world were already starting to address this, where here in the United States, they just keep pushing and pushing more wireless technology on us. This is where the manufacturing or the telecom companies reside. So feel free to use that as a good resource to share. And then one of the major gaps that we had when we first got started with this is that we could see so many people were getting harmed by this, but they had no way to be diagnosed, treated, and most importantly, taught to prevent these injuries. So we are so very grateful that we had the first EMF medical conference back in 2019. And then 2 years later, Elizabeth Kelly, who has worked in public health for many years and with our government for many years, she pulled together the next medical conference. And folks, these conferences take years to put together and a lot of financing. So we had this EMF medical conference, and EMF again stands for electromagnetic fields. We tonight will be focusing primarily on the pulsed microwave radiation electromagnetic fields that come from wireless tech, but it also comes from the wiring in our walls through a lower form of electromagnetic field. And that can throw some dirty electricity into the room, and people who become sensitized often have have problems with that too. So EMF for electromagnetic fields, radio frequency radiation or RF or RFR, microwave radiation, all these boil down to this man-made energy that is now ubiquitous in our living environments today. So we're very grateful for this EMF medical conference. There were 24.5 continuing medical education credits available. That just expired last July, but Elizabeth Kelly took the entire conference and put it online for no charge today. So we don't know of another major medical conference being planned, but everybody can go get this training at no charge from world-leading scientists, doctors, public health experts, a nurse. I was brought in to speak on state and local policy. And if you click on this link, you'll be able to get to it, and we can provide you with a letter to give to your medical team, because it's going to come out of left field for them too. It's usually you and I at the grassroots level who bring this to their attention. My doctor, when I brought it to her attention, she just said, yeah, but well, it's everywhere. And I said, yes, it is, but it's high time we learn to use it safely. So terrific resources. This is my story. This is how I got involved. And now I want to walk you through how my schools became the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms. So for anybody with us today who has an iPhone, if you haven't done this already, I invite you to take it out and go into settings. And we'll talk through the iPhone, but all of our wireless devices have this same fine print legal disclaimer that I'm going to walk you through. And our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have a web page called See the Fine Print, where you can read what other devices say. Like the Apple iPod had a disclaimer in it that says this can cause seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And I personally know of children in 2 neighboring towns who had their first seizures while using a tablet in active wireless radiation mode. So from your settings in an iPhone, scroll down just a little bit and hit General. From General, go all the way down to the bottom to Legal and Regulatory. So Settings, General, Legal and Regulatory. And then on the next screen, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. Hit that. And now we're talking about radio frequency radiation, or this 2-way microwave radiation. And they politely call it energy, and it is a man-made energy. And when we read this, they're telling us that they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra, you're holding it in your hand, you're putting it in your waistband, you're tucking it in your back pocket, holding it up to your head, you are exceeding the government guidelines for public radiation exposure limits. Now, those were set back in the 1990s by the Federal Communications Commission based only on heat. How much heat would it take from a device to raise the temperature of your skin in about a half an hour? Well, the science now shows you don't have to have heat. We are allowing these high levels of microwave radiation, and the harm, as shown in thousands of peer-reviewed studies, is happening way below that, at hundreds of thousands of times below what our government and industry are still exposing us to. So you read a little further in that fine print, and it says to reduce your exposures, basically don't touch a radiating device. It says to use a hands-free option. And one of the suggestions they make is to use the wired headset that comes with your device. I'm going to take a pause on our screen share to show you that for everything we've broken, we have a solution today. This is what you might look into. Instead of putting a wired headset plugged into your phone, if your phone is radiating, one of the properties with microwave or radio frequency is it amplifies around metal. So if you put a regular headset with a wire in it and the other end of the wire is up in your head, that radiation is going to go like, woohoo, party on, man, we're going straight up to the brain, right? Same thing with those earbuds. You are putting a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain, and then it's probably, talking to something that you've got shoved into your shirt or your bra or your waistband from your cell phone. So look for something, if you're inclined, called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. Notice how there's no metal at the tips. It's just rubber. And then it's got a hollow tube or an air tube, about the length of your head. And then it's got these little ferrite beads that break the radiation that come up from the metal wire. It's got good acoustics, mute, volume control. And then it's got a nice long wire so that you can set that radiating device as far away from your body as possible. So as I said, for everything we've broken, we know how to fix it. Excuse me for just one moment. I realize I didn't bring my cell phone in here with me, so I'll be right back. So I keep my cell phone in airplane mode as a rule. When I'm at home, I can forward my cell phone calls just through the settings. It says phone, and you click on that and you can call forward right to your landline. And I know some people were talked into giving up their landline, but once you understand the facts, you may rethink that and pay the $20, $25 a month to get your landline back. So I want to give you a live demonstration of what this invisible exposure looks like. So this is the radio frequency detection meter that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. It's from a company called Safe Living Technologies. And this one is called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 broadband radio frequency meter. And I don't get a kickback or anything on this, but this is a good one. It's in the $400 range. And it's calibrated, so it stands up to rigor. And in my home, knowing what I know, after I stopped circling my tail when I was learning all of this, I said, okay, Cece, you're the mom. It's your job to protect your family. So one by one, I addressed everything in my house that was radiating. And I'm really pleased to show you that this is doable. Look, I'm in the green here. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less on the maximum reading on this. The unit of measurement is a microwatt per square meter. So basically within like 3 feet of air, how much man-made radiation is there? The goal in our sleeping areas, which my home is to be at 10 or less. Some people who have become electrically sensitive can still do okay at 100 or less. So that's kind of what we're gunning for here. Right now, in the green, I'm at 3, but I want to give you a demonstration of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and the antennas come back online. So this one device has a cellular and data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator, a hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better and upgraded to a 5G phone, there's another set of separate antennas in there. Each antenna separately pulses back and forth to the nearest cell tower router going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? And the message today is not no technology, it's safe technology. Oh boy. Okay, so here's what just happened from my cell phone. See how we're now in the flashing red? See how it pops around? That's that spiked erratic pulse of radiation going. So to protect myself, I'm gonna put my cell phone back in airplane mode, and the Bluetooth went off, the Wi-Fi went off, the cellular and data went off. And now I'm gonna read you what just happened. I was at 3 before we got started with this. We are now topping out my meter at 3,180,000 microwatts per square meter. 3 million, and we want to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, just 10. So that is how potent these invisible exposures are. So I'm going to go back and resume my screen share and share with you some of the inroads that I've been able to make in my community. So when I learned that there were radio frequency radiation detection meters available on the market, I had been the grant coordinator for our schools, and I knew we had a little pot of money that got distributed out through grants from our select board, which is our form of government here. And so I put in an application to put a radiation detection meter on loan in our library. And the reason I got the idea for that is when the energy industry came through and took away all of our healthy incandescent light bulbs and wanted us to transition to those swirly CFL or LED light bulbs, which, by the way, throw off a lot of dirty electricity. One of their marketing campaigns was to put a kilowatt meter on loan in our public libraries. And it was barcoded, and I brought it home one day and, tried both of the types of light bulbs. And you do the math and you say, hey, I'm going to save some money every year if I switch over to these new light bulbs. So that's what gave me the idea. If we can have a kilowatt meter on loan in our library, why not a radio frequency meter? And then everybody can borrow it, take it home, take it to your schools, take it to your work, measure your car. So I put my application in, and our select board was like, oh, well, we don't really know about this. Come back next time. So I came back the second time and they were like, gee, this is really more of a Board of Health issue. And by then I'd already talked to our health director in Ashland, and he was around back in the 90s when the industry first came in with cell towers. And they took our municipal leaders out to big fancy hotels, and they wined them and dined them and got them all lathered up about having cell towers right in your own town, what great service you're going to have. And when people raised their hand and said, yeah, but what about the effects? And they said, gee, sorry, that 1996 Telecommunications Act says there's no legal recourse. You can't sue us if there's environmental harm. So that's how they did it initially. And then they came to start thinking they would define environmental harm as human harm as well. So I knew that our health agent and Board of Health were completely in the dark about this issue. And by this time, my bill had come up for public hearing. So I went down to the State House and I'm holding up the science, and I'm holding up our little sign, and I'm holding up a meter. And I could tell when I was testifying before the Joint Committee on Public Health, as I looked at their eyes, I could tell not one of them knew this issue even existed. So that's when I realized I better double down and start meeting with these folks one by one. So I spent years going to the State House for every bill that we had. And at one point we had 20 bills filed, and just educated people. And so I realized I needed to double back to my own town. So I met with every member of our select board. One came to my house. She and I had daughters the same age that went through the school system together. And I taught her what the science was. And she later told me, Yolanda said, I talked to my girls about this so that they would know not to put these radiating devices on their bodies. So I thought, cool, she heard me. One of our select board members is a police officer, retired, and he said, Cece, you had me at hello. They used to have the radar guns mounted in the back of the police cruisers that would shoot that radar, this radiation, right through their brains, and cops were getting brain tumors, and others were getting thigh tumors from holding the radar guns on their thighs while they were scanning traffic. So he sort of understood that, yeah, there's definitely a risk here. And so it took me all these one-on-one conversations, but eventually they granted me this $400 grant conditionally to put a meter on loan in my library. And so the condition was that our library board of trustees would have to approve this to come into circulation. So then I had to go present to the library, and there were 5 members there. And one gentleman sat there with his arms folded, and you could just tell he had hogwash written all across his face. Another one said, well, I can't wait to get that thing to take it home and see what's going on in my house. And then a third woman said, well, regardless of how we feel personally, as a library, we are a conduit of information. And this sounds like something that the community would be interested in. So let's take a vote. And they voted 4-1 to put a radio frequency detection meter on loan in their public library. And so we kind of piloted that. And now I hear from people around the country and around Massachusetts that they love that idea. And today it's a much easier ask because our libraries are having to reinvent themselves because people don't just come to the library for books anymore. So they're adding new services. And one of them is the Library of Things. So our library has projectors you can borrow. They have games and puzzles and a little metal detector. So all sorts of cool things you can borrow from the library. So it's not a really hard ask to say, can you please also put a radio frequency detection meter on loan? Some libraries will buy them outright. Out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood that made the neighbors so sick, 17 people got really sick to the point where they had to abandon their homes. So the Pittsfield Library put one in circulation. And anybody who's in these library networks from different towns can usually come in and borrow it too. So if you approach your library and they say they don't have the funding, or maybe they could do 200 but not 400, please reach out to the Environmental Health Trust. They have a small grant fund, and they may have funding if your librarian contacts them directly. It can't be the citizens, the librarian has to contact them. So again, solutions for everything. And one of the last bastions of independent reporting today is our local cable stations. And WACA TV here in Ashland has been so gracious. They've done a number of public service announcements for me. They have done full episodes when I was the guest on somebody's show. And then out in Worcester, Massachusetts, I was brought in with Patricia Burke, who's another advocate in this space, to do a couple episodes out at WCCA. And then the station manager reached out to me last year and said, Cece, you should just have your own show. So we came up with this Tech Safe series, and our co-host tonight, Sidnee, has done 2 episodes with me, episode 22 and episode 32. So you can go out there and see much more of her story and all the incredible work that she and her colleagues have been doing out in California. So by all means, speak to your own cable stations. They love it when the community comes up with an idea and says, hey, will you help us do a program? I would be honored to come in and, be interviewed by you. We can get education out to your community. So let us know how we can help. All right. So what does the science actually tell us? First, we're going to look at the long-term effects, and then we'll switch over and take a look at what is happening short term. So child and adult cancers. The U.S. National Toxicology Program is part of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. And they are arguably perhaps the world's leading researcher in toxics. So they are the gold standard. They started this study on cell phone radio frequency radiation, or a series of studies 2 decades ago, when we had 2G and 3G just coming on the scene. They went in expecting to prove that cell phones are safe. They were commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration to do this study. And after 20 years, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review down at the National Institutes of Health with world-leading experts in microwave radiation. And at the end of the day, they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. There was also evidence of tumors. So the clear evidence was in the lining of the heart and the Schwann cells. There was also evidence in the thyroid, acoustic neuromas. There was evidence of some brain tumor activity. So this was a really good study. And anytime a good study is done, the industry will get ahead of it. And they will say, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more than one study. Well, right on the heels of concluding our $30 million study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large-scale peer-reviewed study that corroborated everything that we found from cell phones, they found from cell towers. So it doesn't matter where this radiation is coming from, it all does the same damage. So, DNA is our roadmap to grow a proper anything from a child to a plant to a pollinator to any living cell. And this is damaging the DNA. It was the infertility studies that got me on my feet. I started reading them, and I learned that they've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, It caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours. It was causing apoptosis or programmed cell death in just 4 hours. So that was the day that I started plucking up my courage, because we had just sent my oldest daughter off to college with her MacBook, which of course she was using right on top of her reproductive organs. Our youngest daughter had just gone into high school, and we thought we'd give her a leg up. So for Christmas, we surprised her with a laptop of her own. And where was she using it? But right on top of her reproductive organs. And we now have additional studies that have come out in the last 10 years that, corroborate everything I'd already read, but also women's fertility issues as well. Kaiser Permanente did an extremely well done study that showed that women who are using wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rates. So the science is solid. Neurotoxicity. Even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression. We were seeing suicidal ideation like never before. And what this is showing us is that this constant pulsation of microwave radiation is causing people to become neurotoxic. So Dr. Hugh Taylor heads up the OB/GYN program at Yale, and he has done some of these rodent studies. And when they expose the pregnant mice to cell phone radiation for a certain number of hours a day, these pups came out bouncing off the walls, looking an awful lot like a child with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world, unable to focus. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Mass General Hospital. She's now retired, but she was a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she saw huge connections between what we know scientifically happens to the brain with microwave radiation and what she was seeing in the families in her care. Dr. Martin Pall pulled together the science on Alzheimer's, and where Alzheimer's used to hit people in their 80s and 90s, 70s maybe, we're now seeing it hit in the 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in some rare cases, Alzheimer's is hitting in people in their 20s. How long can we continue to pollute the environment of the brain before we take action on this? So we're very grateful when more mainstream organizations start getting funding to address this. I, as a mom, learned about the Environmental Working Group because every year they put out these 2 lists on pesticides in our food called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So I was already familiar with their work, and now they've gotten funding. They have a PhD on staff who's working on the wireless radiation issue, and they have some amazing fact sheets for the public. This one is protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. This one is the effects of this radio frequency radiation on the central nervous system, all well resourced with the science. And so know your audience. If you want to open this conversation with somebody at work or school or your loved ones or your friends, maybe this is something that they would pay attention to. And then, folks, we have to protect our children. They are not just little adults. Biologically, they are absorbing more of this radiation inch per inch. One of the reasons is that they have thinner skulls and their brain has a higher water content. So as Dr. Om Gandhi modeled for us here, these head models are turned on their sides. The yellow part is the ear. So when you put a cell phone up to your fully developed head, that is microwaving your brain about 1/3 of the way through. On a 10-year-old child, it's going about 3/4 of the way into that child's brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it's penetrating almost the entire brain. So please never put a cell phone up to a child's head. So those are some of the long-term effects. And then we have the short-term effects. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Jobs Area Network, Indoor Quality, they have long since recognized that there are biological effects that are causing electromagnetic radiation from wireless and other electromagnetic field exposures. So you can go out to the ADA and validate this. We're going to go through some of the symptoms that a lot of people are feeling today. Insomnia is a huge one, but with a little education, people will come back to me and say, wow, I didn't want to know this. I didn't want to believe it, but I took your advice and I created a sleep sanctuary, which just means turn it all off at night. You can still use your cell phone for an alarm. You can still use the clock. You can still use the camera. You can still use any entertainment that you've downloaded. It's all right there to enjoy. It's not good for our eyes. We're now having an epidemic of myopia because we're looking at shallows in the screen instead of looking to infinity and beyond, which keeps our eyes shaped properly. Now we have an epidemic of myopia. So it's not a good idea to be looking at these small screens, but they'll come back and say, wow, you know, I turned it all off last night and I slept through the night for the first time in years, right? Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines that people's doctors can't figure out, nosebleeds, and even ear bleeds. So for years, the industry got away with saying, well, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, now we have the science on what's causing the cancer. Now we know what's causing a lot of the infertility. With the neurotoxicity too, with insomnia, we have our circadian rhythm. We are light beings. We operate with different organs resetting throughout the 24-hour cycle on our circadian rhythm. And in the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in the brain releases melatonin. Melatonin's job is, one, to go in and regulate your sleep, and two, to escort the toxins out of the day through the bloodstream and get it eliminated out of the body. So when we leave this man-made light pulsating all night, the brain's over there going, do, the lights are still on. When's it going to get dark so I can release melatonin? So now we have introduced this toxin into our environment that's dysregulating our melatonin release. And now we have this whole downstream effect when we're not getting proper sleep. So with the headaches and nosebleeds, there's something called the rouleau formation. And in my little brain, rouleau sounds a lot like the candies Rolos. Remember those, the caramel chocolate stacked candies? Well, that's a little bit like what happens. Our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and oxygenating all of our systems and organs. Under a microscope, Dr. Magda Havas has shown that after 10 minutes exposure to radio frequency, those free-floating, smooth blood cells start looking like bottle caps, and then they start magnetizing together and they clump together like that stack of Rolos. And then that stack of blood cells, deformed, can't get to where it needs to go to bring the oxygen to our cells. So we have what our doctors will call oxidative stress. And Dr. Cindy Russell put it in layman's terms and says, if we don't have oxygen, we are basically resting ourselves from the inside out. And so we see all this fallout. Chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. Here's another mechanism of harm. Our skin has little antennas in the surface of the skin that help us to navigate through our world. Are we too cold? Are we too hot? This is our temperature control here so that we know how to remediate that and keep ourselves safe. People talk about getting the hot ear from holding the phone up to their head. People talk about getting skin rashes and flushing and tingling, maybe where you keep that cell phone in your pocket. Your nerves start getting damaged in there. Heartbeats that go too fast or too slow. We are bioelectrical beings, and all of our major organs can get dysregulated by this overpowering pulsation of nonstop microwaves. So for some people, their heart may go too fast. For other people, it may go too slow. Others may have arrhythmias. So we need to learn to be careful. Cognitive impairment, where we can't remember what we were doing or where we were going. the anger and behavior issues. Wow, it was shocking at the EMF medical conference to hear more than one of these doctors say, if we don't get ahead of this, we can expect to see more of what we've been seeing with these anger outbursts, mass shootings. Here in Boston, as the kids went back to school after the pandemic with all these issued Chromebooks that every kid was given to go home for the pandemic with no safety training, when they got back into the schools with their peers, it was on the news 3 different times that 3 different school districts in Boston, the kids were literally wailing on another student with their Chromebook. So we can't keep radiating the brain and expect everybody to behave like they used to. And as I said, the anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation, already epidemic levels before the pandemic. So, there's a lot biologically that this can account for. And again, we have the science. And this isn't just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet. You can click on this link when you get my slides and see what's happening with this additional robust body of science on what it's doing to our wildlife and the environment. And our friends at the Environmental Health Trust just recently launched this new website called Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment. And you will find all the science there and action items for what we need to be doing to protect our environment. So a little synopsis, all of our pollinators and all of our birds, they have a natural built-in symbiosis with the Earth's electromagnetic field. Now, there was a scientist named Schumann, and Schumann figured out that the Earth pulses this electromagnetic field every 7.83 seconds, or Schumann's resonance is called 7.83 hertz. That hertz means once a cycle, right? So once every 7.83 seconds, the Earth gives us this beautiful healing energy that every living thing is meant to be directly connected to. That's what helps to keep us regulated. But now you and I, we walk around with rubber-soled shoes. That doesn't allow the electrons to penetrate and help regulate our body. We sleep off the ground. We drive in cars off the ground. So it's really lovely to be able to get out and connect to the Earth and ground yourself. But our pollinators and the birds have like magnetite in the beaks and crystals, in their brains that keep them in sync with the Earth's electromagnetic field. But when we immerse them in this giant layer of electropollution, we're finding through the science that they can't find their way back to their hives. So it's not just the neonicotinoids and other environmental chemicals that are causing our colony collapses and are causing dozens of species of pollinators to disappear rapidly. It's not just the chemicals. We've got to get ahead of the radiation too. In The Hague in the Netherlands, when they started testing 5G signals, birds literally by the hundreds dropped from the sky. Same thing, we got reports on cruise ships because they put these massive antennas on the top of the cruise ship. The birds and stuff see the lights, they come over, they get, in this sphere, and then they get walloped, and then they start dropping down to the decks of the ship. So we're really doing a number on our wildlife and the environment. The trees, there's a lot of studies on the trees too. Energy consumption, for those concerned with climate change, you need to know that there was a Greenpeace analyst as far back as 2012 who said if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And look at how much more we've piled on in the last 12 years. Yeah, and then Katie Singer is a journalist who's done a lot of investigation into the mineral extraction. Our devices have dozens of minerals that are being pulled out of the earth through just these atrocious, inhumane conditions down in the Congo and elsewhere. If we really took the time to study that, we would never go get a new device just because the industry has sold us on more bells and whistles. we would use every single device to its full and useful life, make sure it gets recycled in the end, and really get away from wireless technology. Data warehouses, networks, and our own devices use so much energy. Streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. Don't watch something that's being live streamed. Download it to your devices and turn off all the antennas. Every time we send and receive, every time we charge and recharge all of our devices, we are consuming energy. And then in the background, most of us have had far too many apps on our devices that we don't really even use. And if we leave them just hanging out there, they're continuously using energy to do updates in the background. So go on a digital diet, get rid of everything you don't absolutely have to have. One of the biggest questions I had was, why don't we know about this? If little me can go look at the science and figure this out, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this free online report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it presumably regulates. When I read Captured Agency, it taught me that there is a revolving door in Washington, D.C. between our federal agencies and the industry. And they are not protecting public health and safety. They are protecting corporate profits. So look at, they actually even put a revolving door on the cover of the Captured Agency report. And they liken this to the Big Tobacco playbook, because when you can own the media, you can control the messaging. When you can buy politicians or con them into thinking, oh, this is all fine and it's going to be great for the economy, then you own public policy. When you can put out advertisements that promote the benefits of this, and the media has a conflict of interest because you're paying their bills through your advertising revenue, or you outright own the media channels, there's another conflict of interest, and the public is kept in the dark. So Captured Agency was my missing puzzle piece. That was my aha. Nobody's got our backs on this. There is no cavalry coming. So we have to do the work ourselves. That was in 2015. ProPublica came out with another good expose in recent years on that. And when that $30 million National Toxicology Program study was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration, that was a whole different set of people 20 years ago. Those guys are all long since retired or passed away. Today, the gentleman who's in charge of radiation control at the Food and Drug Administration is this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. When that $30 million study concluded clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage, that should have triggered public policy to protect you and I. Instead, Dr. Shuren went over to the FCC and said, we don't believe that study. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing. And one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? And again, do your homework. You don't have to look very far to discover that Dr. Shuren is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and other big, big agro, big pharma, big environmental polluters. So huge conflicts of interest with our federal agencies. And sadly, it goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. There are two groups at the WHO who are involved with electromagnetic fields and radio frequency. One of them is self-appointed by the industry, and they have no expertise in microwave radio frequency, biological, non-thermal effects. The other group is the scientists who understand this, and they are calling for this to be reclassified. In 2011, there was already enough evidence of harm to classify this radio frequency as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. That's in the middle. It wasn't dismissed. It wasn't the second tier. It was right in the middle that said we have enough to know we should be invoking the precautionary principle here, and they didn't do it. Instead, they said more research is needed. So since then, we have filled that gap with the Ramazzini Institute and the National Toxicology Program rodent studies. And now the scientists are calling for it to be reclassified as a group 1 known human carcinogen, right up there with lead, DDT, thalidomide. But they have reopened their investigation, not only to look at cancers, but to look at the effects on children, to look at the effects on the elderly, to account for those with electromagnetic sensitivity, to account for what it's doing to our environment. But it looks like that investigation is getting stacked with industry people, not the qualified scientists. So if you, and I was actually at a meeting one time where I was at the Dover Sherborne Health and Wellness Committee at the school district next to my town. And as I was sharing these facts, somebody was on his tablet and he was fact checking me. And he said, oh, the World Health Organization says this is fine. I said, well, look at the dates. And did you know that they are now reopening their investigation? And sure enough, if you do a quick Google search, you will come up with old information saying, well, it's inconclusive, more science is needed. You'll be hard pressed to find this link that we've got for you here that shows that this investigation is now underway. So that's all the bad news, folks. Let's start focusing on solutions. And I'm going to walk you through what to do with your own devices. So on the back of your router, you'll find there are Ethernet ports. And just like we always used to do before we got talked into wireless, all you have to do is run a nice long cable from your router to your devices. And most of us today have more than one device. You might have cell phones, tablets, laptops, gaming, whatever. Just hardwire it. And that just means literally putting a wire back in. You can get an Ethernet switch, and you can think of that as like an extension box for electronics. You plug in one big long cable to where you use most of your technology, and then plug it into one port, and then get little Ethernet cables for each port on here, and then adapters for your devices. So who knew, right? When I figured this out, I was grateful to find that we still had a box of Ethernet cables down in my basement. And then I went down to the Apple store and I talked to the whiz kid in the back of the store, and I told him that I wanted to hardwire my daughter's iPhone because in high school, she was sitting there with her technology for 3 hours a night doing homework with her friends. And we figured out how to hardwire the laptop because her laptop still had an Ethernet port on it. So then we just went into settings and turned off all the antennas, but her cell phone no longer has the Ethernet port. So I learned that you can get something, for example, for the iPhone, the lightning adapter. All you have to do is plug it into the phone on one end, plug it into the Ethernet port on the other end, the Ethernet cable, and you're hardwired. Then you just have to go into your settings and turn off all those antennas, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the locator, the hotspot, the cellular, the data, and any 5G antennas. And so I had my daughter hook this up, and she was 15, so she was rolling her eyeballs at me. And I said, honey, just do something like you normally do. And she does. And she goes, whoa, it's so much faster. And we've all been sold on the convenience, but they're not telling us that Wi-Fi is poor quality technology. Your signal is so much faster through a cable. It's far more reliable. Your data and your data is not being buckshot out into the air for some hacker at the curb to grab and take and sell. So hands down, hardwired tech beats wireless at every turn except for the convenience factor. So then you can just go into your settings and send your cell phone calls to your landline. And again, that's your call. If you want to use wireless tech, that's your choice, but you can also just get your landline back. So the first step is plugging in the wires. The second step is turning off all the antennas. When I went to go figure out what my router was doing, it was off the charts with radiation. So I contacted my internet service provider and said, I'm hardwiring. How do I make that thing stop radiating? And they said, oh, that's easy. Sit down at your computer. And I went, really? They said, yeah, we're going to walk you through how to get into your online account. And I did. And I just had to go into wireless settings, and there was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna and a 5 gigahertz antenna. All I had to do was say off, apply. And I got this notice saying, well, you realize you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off, right? And I said, yes. And then I waited a few minutes and I went and I measured. And again, radio silence. But you don't know until you measure. I'll give you an example. My daughter, when she was in college, used to teach swim lessons in our backyard. And she came home and said, hey, Mom, can I just turn on the Wi-Fi real quick to print out my swim schedule? And I said, sure, just make sure you turn it off as soon as you're done. So the next Monday morning, I'm sitting here and I'm going, wow, I don't feel right. I had slept well. I ate a clean organic breakfast, but it felt like the earth was just sucking me down again. So I turned on my meter and I scanned my office here, and it was my printer. And the little glow plate with the Wi-Fi logo was not lit up. And I went, well, that's weird. Why is it sending so much signal? And I just looked up the manual online, and lo and behold, there were 3 antennas in that one printer, and the glow plate only controlled 1. So all I had to do was go into settings, find those other 2 antennas, and just turn them off, and then measure again. And I had radio silence. So everything that we've done with the equipment that we bought for ourselves, we can make some choices around and get down to as low as reasonably achievable. That's the ALARA principle that the Centers for Disease Control uses today for ionizing radiation. That's the X-rays, the sun, all the stuff that can knock an atom and break an atom, knock a molecule off. That's ionizing radiation, but that principle should be now applied to non-ionizing, non-thermal, low-level radio frequency microwave radiation. That's to say wireless. So it's critically important to measure. Otherwise, the industry's going to try and put 200 wireless devices in every one of our hands in our homes. And if you don't measure, you're not going to know. We got a new stove, a range, and it had smart technology for people, I don't know, who might want to control their stove from not being in the house. I don't know. That's a personal choice. Anyway, I measured it and it was 1,090,090, and we want to be at 10 or less microwatts per square meter in our home. 1,090,090. Nothing in the manual. I couldn't find anything in the settings to turn those, the antenna off. But in the manual, there was the RF exposure disclaimer in there that said, stay like 20 centimeters away from this. And I'm thinking, how am I supposed to stay 20 centimeters away and cook my food, right? I'm going to be the one cooking in the kitchen. So we sent a service tech to my home, and long story short, he pulled off the back and just looked at the motherboard, and right next to the motherboard behind the digital display was this little tiny board. He just unplugged it. That was the Wi-Fi antenna. And, these things, I have one around here somewhere. Oh, I paid a tech guy $80 to open up my TV and pull out the wireless antenna because I couldn't disable it through the settings. This is the enemy. This is all it is. It's a little plug with a little board that radiates microwave radiation when it's plugged in. So it's not rocket science to fix this stuff, you guys. So that's what you and I can do for the things that are under our control. But unfortunately, we're getting in deeper and deeper with exposures that we may not have control over. One of these is the utility smart meters. When I was a little girl, I was one of 10 kids, and we were outside playing a lot, and we do a lot of hide and seek. So I would be in the bushes waiting to be found, and I would sit there and just keep myself entertained watching the little dials go around on our utility meters, gas, water, today it's solar, electric, propane. That was a good old analog mechanical meter. It had no radiation. It didn't put any dirty electricity on our homes. And then industry came through and started talking our towns into getting rid of these meters that used to last for 40 or 50 years. Talked us into getting these digital meters that have a much shorter lifespan that'll have to be replaced, which is good for the industry's bottom line, not for us. These digital meters pulse radiation constantly. The industry will tell you, oh, it's just a couple seconds a day. Well, I took my meter and I sat in my dining room at the wall where we have 2 electric meters mounted, one for our solar system and one for our regular electricity. And I sat there and I counted and I did the math, and that was pulsating 17,000 times into my home. These things pulse continuously. And remember how metal amplifies radiation? So now you've got this radiation pulsating into your house that can hop on the wires or the pipes and travel, turning your home into one giant microwave antenna. And then we have report after report of these things blowing up, causing fires, explosions, improper grounding, power surges that cause them to blow. And we need to know that with an electrical fire, the fire department can't just come and start hosing it down. They have to contact the electric company, and then they have to shut it down from their end. And this can take up to an hour, because if you hose an electrical fire, that's going to cause an arc that's going to come back and electrocute the firefighter. So if you've got a windy day and one of these smart meter fires going, guess what? You could have your whole neighborhood on fire. Huge issues with data harvesting and privacy. These industries are taking your data. They're learning what kind of usage you have, when you're using it, what appliances you're using, and they're selling that off to third-party vendors in many cases. And then look at this little diagram here. So let's say this is your house. Your meter is sending your data down the line to the next house, and then they're picking up that, and then they're going to the next, and it aggregates. And so as you live further down the line, you're getting more and more radiation to carry all that data to your home. And then eventually it goes to a collection station, usually up on a pole. Whoever has the misfortune of living there has additional exposures. And then this data is flying through the air. So any thieves or hackers, they can snag your data and know your patterns. They'll know when you leave the house for the day. They can back up their truck and take your toys. And then the industry can sell this to third-party vendors who want to know what kind of equipment you have, so they can sell you additional product. So these smart meters are not smart. They're not bringing the cost saves that the industry has been promising. And at the EMF Medical Conference, we were taught that when these smart meters go in, this is a leading cause of sudden onset microwave sickness. And it's a huge environmental justice issue where these toxic industries roll into town, roll out their toxic equipment, and then they say, hey, it was successful here, so we're going to now show it all over the state, get everybody signed up, and hey, New York, hey, Rhode Island, hey, Connecticut, look how great Massachusetts was. You guys are getting behind. You better jump on the bandwagon here. So we actually had our Attorney General take down National Grid here, or fine them, because they went way over budget economically. And that's all our Attorney General was concerned about, was the economics. They had no idea that they were putting toxic smart meters on everybody's homes and schools and businesses. So this is a huge environmental justice issue where they go to someplace like Worcester, which is economically on the lower end. They have a lot of people who don't even speak English, so they're not going to know what's going on when the utility companies are putting these things on their homes. There's a couple of really good TEDx talks. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer married to a medical doctor, and they both got really sick in a very short amount of time, and nothing in her medical training could teach her what was going on with all these wacky symptoms they were having. And Jeremy ultimately figured out it coincided with when those smart meters went on, and he did his research and found out that, yeah, these smart meters can cause all these symptoms that they were having. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight, ironically, is a radiologist. So she works with ionizing radiation and had no idea about the low-level non-ionizing radiation from wireless until a smart meter showed up on her home, and she got really sick, very neurotoxic, to the point where she was out in traffic with her daughter in the car, and she could not remember if that green light meant stop or go. It was a 50-50 guess. She made the right choice and thankfully made it home. Something on that smart meter malfunctioned and they had to take it off, and her symptoms all started going away. And then she got sick again and went outside and realized they had put a smart meter back on her home. So that's where she started figuring this out and doing her research. And she has since done a TEDx talk as well. So great resources. Again, know your audience. This is a hard thing for engineers, physicists, technologists, people who work in the industry to get their heads around. So know your audience and know that we've got great resources. Some regions allow you to opt out of the smart meters. They might charge you a fee. Up in Vermont, they got a law passed for a no fee opt out, so it can be done. But I, for example, live in Eversource territory and they don't offer an opt out. National Grid does, but they charge you a swap out fee to get a safe meter back on your home. And then they charge you a fee every month to get your reading. And that's kind of like extortion just to get a public utility. So you need to ask the questions, you need to look at your meters, and if it has an FCC ID number on it, that's your clue that it's radiating. Next, we have the cell towers. These started in industrial parks, 300 feet in the air, far away from where we lived. Then they started encroaching. If they could put these antennas up on a building and paint it the same color, then aesthetically, legally, they can do that. And then they started bringing them in closer and closer to where we live, where we work, where we play, where we worship. They started putting cell towers in church steeples and giving the churches a kickback. So it's critically important that we look at the non-industry funded science. And I mentioned that I'm a tech writer. And when I started my investigation, I got hit way over my head. There was so much science out there. And I couldn't remember where I had seen important resources that I wanted to get back to or share. So being a tech writer, I just started my own very simple research repository, no bells or whistles, just different pages with bullets getting quickly to the peer-reviewed science and other important documents. So I called my research repository Understanding EMFs because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. And I have all of these pages in the navigation linked to the resource page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So anybody can get to this. But what the epidemiological scientists are telling us, these are the scientists who study what's happening in society. Others study what's happening in vivo or in vitro, which means in the lab or in the, the organism. The epidemiological studies are showing increased neurotoxicity, higher death rates, and other symptoms within a certain boundary. So from where cell towers are, they're seeing these elevated death and neurotoxic rates within 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet. That curve starts coming down at 500 meters. It doesn't actually catch up to normal population statistics till double that. So coming down at 500 meters is already a compromise. They recommend that be at least 500 meters, but those with compromised health or children or pregnant women or the elderly should be at least a quarter mile to a half a mile away. So you can look at the science, and then antennasearch.com is the website where you can put in an address and it'll give you a return of a 3-mile radius. And so you can put in your home address or your schools or your office and see how many antennas and cell towers are within that 3-mile radius. I was just so disheartened to see this map of Boston over here. Every one of these dots is one of these giant cell antennas or towers. And this is what one particular neighborhood now looks like. It's in the Hyde Park neighborhood on Ruskin Road. But look at the electro pollution here. When I put in the State House address for downtown Boston, within 3 miles, there were 1,520 towers with more than 4,500 antennas. And these antennas go for miles. So just imagine that layer upon layer of all these cell towers pulsating this toxic microwave radiation. And now we're getting into 5G small cells, which are being mounted outside of people's homes for their new revenue stream. So what is 5G? 5G is a marketing term that means 5th generation technology. About every 10 years, we get another generation, a new revenue stream for the industry, and new bells and whistles. So our friends in Hawaii, at Safe Tech Hawaii, put up this quick little video in about 5 or 6 minutes. What is 5G and what isn't 5G? So that's a good little lesson there, but it just means 5th generation technology, and the industry is spinning it up that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways, all this glitz and glamour. And you know, those faster downloads, look who's buying up the entertainment industry. It's these same companies that are promoting all of 5G and telecom and the Wi-Fi industry. Because that's their next revenue stream. The way 5G works today is it doesn't replace 3G and 4G, which your phones currently have. 3G and 4G use really long wavelengths that can penetrate into the building, and that's how they can reach your devices indoors. All that's left of the electromagnetic spectrum are these tiny little millimeter waves. And our governments are using these now for beam forming, crowd control, for crowd disbursement. It burns you if you get, hit with their technology there. But it's the same technology that they're now bringing back again into the commercial sector, just like they did with the cell tower technology. So these tiny little millimeter waves, they're spinning it that you're going to get all this fast speed, fast download. But these little millimeter waves get disrupted by things in their path, like trees, snow, rain. So their solution is to put millions of cell towers at close range, close together, like every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhood in our public access way, at the curb, right outside your bedroom window, at bedroom height. That is what 5G is, and it's making a lot of people very sick. We've gotten reports that industry's coming in, sometimes under the cover of darkness, and just lopping off the trees so their signals can get by. At a time when our big cities are starting to address climate change by saying we need a better tree canopy to keep the cities cool in the summertime. Not cutting trees down or not just lopping them off willy-nilly. So it's a raw deal on so many levels. And then Congressman Senator Richard Blumenthal was at a commerce, again, follow the dollar, right? He was at a commerce hearing, and he said to 2 industry leaders there, please share with us, how much money have you spent on independent science to prove that this is safe before you brought 5G to market? And the industry guys kind of hemmed and hawed. And in the end, were made to admit that they don't know of any peer-reviewed independent science showing this is safe. So Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut said, so as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's how industry works. Get it going, ask questions later. And then, insult to injury, Computer World and other trade journals are saying 5G is a bad joke. It's not even delivering faster speeds than what we already had with toxic 4G. So our own devices, utility smart meters, cell towers, 5G small cells, there are also satellites that are transmitting from up above now. Dr. Magda Havas, who is the co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, she's now retired professor emeritus from Trent University up in Canada, where she taught EMFs for 25 years. She recognizes that there are not many governments who are doing the monitoring of the cumulative effect of all these many different exposures coming at us at once. So she has partnered with Safe Living Technologies that makes this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And she's inviting us to be citizen scientists. So for anybody who gets this meter, because you have to have the same scientific device to do the studies, she is asking us to take our clipboard, bring a friend, go out and start measuring what's happening in our own towns, and then put that data into her database. And she can then do this map that shows, can you brag about your town? Are you in the green? That's the G in brag. A is for amber, R is for red, and B is for blackout. So she's starting to amass the data with our help. And bless Rob Metzinger, who owns Safe Living Technologies. He has partnered with Dr. Havas, and anybody who wants to be a citizen scientist for her research, you can go out to globalemf.net, let them know that you would like to participate, and Rob is offering a discount on this meter. When I did it a few years ago, I think I paid $300 instead of $400, so it's significant savings. So go to globalemf.net and contact them for the discount code, and they will tell you how to get involved with the science. So we talked about indoors, we're supposed to be at 10 microwatts per square meter or less. In Salzburg many years ago, scientists got together and said, you know, outdoors, if we could get it down to 1,000, so long as you're not spending time right under an antenna, that would probably be sort of okay if you can go home and have a clean space where your body can catch up and do the cell repair. So outdoor, they said the goal can be less than 1,000 microwatts. So here's a look at what it really looks like. In Westmoreland, when one of the New Hampshire for Safe Technology folks measured, they were in the green. In Keene, New Hampshire, a few years ago, they were in the yellow. Now we know they put these 5G small cells in Keene, and we should be remeasuring because we are banking that they are now in the red or the black. Nasha was already in the red, Concord, New Hampshire, and these were taken during the pandemic when there wasn't a lot of car and foot traffic. So this was just the ambient radiation, not everybody's devices. Stratham, New Hampshire was already in the blackout. They put a big cell tower right on their main drag. And then here in Boston, for those who've had the fun of going down to the North End, that's where all of our incredible Italian restaurants and bakeries are on the street level. And then there are people who live right above that. And on the main drag down Hanover Street, we see these beautiful wrought iron light posts that are actually small cell antennas. You go down to the cross streets and look down, and they put these ugly gray monopoles right outside people's bedroom windows. So this is what our big cities and towns are up against these days, unless we get ahead of it and start learning and using our voices. So Dr. Martin Luther King taught us when we have important changes in our society, it comes through 3 channels. First, the public learns, decides to do something, and uses their voice. It goes through the courts, and there are many lawsuits happening right now that don't get reported in mainstream media because it's owned by these industries. And then ultimately public policy gets enacted. So I've got some really good resources for you to explore in all these areas. I'll whip through some of it quickly, but just know when you get my slides that you are more than welcome to go do the deep dive into what interests you. So first we'll look at legal. when the head of the FDA's radiation control area went to the FCC and said, we don't need to change our public radiation limits. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. Once the FCC put that determination in something called the Federal Register, that they were not going to change their 1996 radiation limits, then the lawsuits began. The Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others around the country got rolled into this one lawsuit that was called EH Trust or Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC. And they won this lawsuit. There had been an open docket with the FCC for 6 years, into which all the science, the medical results, the public who put their stories in about loved ones or themselves who had been harmed or killed by these, for example, cell phone tumors, all that was in the public record, and the FCC completely ignored it. So the folks who sued the FCC spent thousands upon thousands of dollars putting together the public record, and handed these 3 judges in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals 27 big fat binders with all the evidence of harm in it. So of course the judges are going through and said to the FCC, so where's your homework? How did you determine that those levels from 96 were okay? And the FCC said, well, the FDA said it was okay. So of course the judges said, well, where's the FDA's homework? And there is none. Not one of our federal agencies has done the review on the science. We had some good people back 20 years ago, and they all got defunded when that Telecom Act that was written by industry got put into law. So there's no cavalry coming, and the lawsuits are going to take years. So the court ruled that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious in reaffirming those 1996 guidelines. And I didn't know what that meant, so I had to go look it up. It means they didn't do their homework. They made it up. So the courts remanded it or sent it back to the FCC to account for the vulnerabilities to children, to those with electrical sensitivities that are getting disabled, to the elderly, to the environment. And it's now been, it'll be 3 years in August, and the FCC has done nothing. And the courts don't like to put a deadline on these agencies. So it's going to take a long time, and the harm is mounting. I mentioned out in Pittsfield that 17 children and adults became so sick from a cell tower that they had to abandon their homes. And for the first time in our country, their Board of Health investigated at the direction of their city council and mayor. They talked to the doctors, they talked to the scientists, they talked to the engineers, they talked to the industry, and they documented all of their findings in this, I think it's like 28 pages, in this cease and desist emergency order, asking Verizon to come to the table and let's fix this. There was a commercial property owner who said, Verizon, you can move the cell tower to our property. Nobody lives here. We don't care. Get it away from the neighborhoods. Verizon would not come to the table. Instead, they sued. They put an injunction against the town of Pittsfield saying, well, we think we have authority, and the Board of Health has no leg to stand on. Well, the Board of Health had already been doing their homework with the state, Massachusetts Association of Health Boards, and speaking to the attorneys there. And they took a look at what the law says, and the law only applies to the siting and getting the applications approved for the initial installation. Once something comes into the community and it's toxic or a nuisance, it is the jurisdiction of the Board of Health to fix that. So long story short, there's a big lawsuit out in Pittsfield to reinstate that emergency order so the Board of Health can do its job. We hope to see that come out maybe this spring, maybe early summer, and the judge has agreed to let this go through and to look at the evidence. So that was really positive that it came through, and the judge is now looking at the public record on this. So then there was the Face School here in Massachusetts, where it's a really prestigious international boarding school the Faith School feeds up to St. Mark's, where like Saudi princes might send their sons to be educated. And there was a little boy who got really sick at school, and it wound up being this electrosensitivity. He was fine at home on school break, summer vacation, but when he went back into the Faith School, all of his symptoms came back. So they had a lawsuit because the school would not offer accommodations. And for the first time in the United States, the courts recognized that, yes, there are non-thermal biological effects. So lots of lawsuits happening all over the country, all over the world. But again, we don't hear about it through mainstream media because it's owned by these industries. Policy solutions. I mentioned that we've had up to 20 bills over the last 10 years, and it took New Hampshire State Representative Patrick Abrami, who was an engineer, and when his constituent Deb Hodgson got so sick that it almost killed her, she figured out that it was the radiation in her house. And when she went off Coumadin, she knew that it could affect, the radiation could affect her blood. So she told her family that they were going to get rid of the wireless, and her, young adult children and her husband were looking at her like mom's crazy. But she stood her ground because she was losing her health rapidly. Got rid of all the wireless. And you know what convinced her family that maybe mom's not crazy? The kids had given her a plant that sat in the window in her kitchen and did basically nothing for about 15 months, maybe. Within a couple of months of having no Wi-Fi in the house, that plant grew like 15 inches and the kids couldn't believe it. So that's when they started listening. They now have their own homes and families and children, and they have decided to hardwire their homes too. So Rep. Abrami was introduced to me by Deb, and they came down to my house in Massachusetts. They jumped in his car and drove down. We spent the afternoon at my kitchen table, and we helped him to connect the dots. And he's an engineer, and he'd only been taught you have to have heat. So when he started looking at the science, he's like, wow, what have we done here? And so he wrote a bill with very pointed questions after we informed him of what's going on. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and AM Best long since recognized this as a world-leading risk and put exclusions in their policies they don't cover for damages? So that can leave our towns on the hook for damages from these exposures. That's a huge red flag. Why does that legal fine print that we reviewed earlier even exist? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of studies and not accounting for anything at the non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level biological effect? And why does our country allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Think about a child in a classroom today. Wireless access point pulsating heavy toxin from the ceiling. Each child issued a Chromebook or another tablet, each one radiating, and this radiation goes out like a pebble in a pond from every single device. And then their cell phones and the wire in their glasses or their braces or their earrings or their underwire in their bra. All of it's amplifying the radiation, and nobody is accounting for those cumulative effects, and we wonder why our kids are so sick. So Rep. Abrami introduced this bill. We brought in leading experts. In 7 months, we got it passed into law through the House, through the Senate, under Governor Sununu's pen. They had 1 year to investigate, and even during the pandemic, even after their government shut down for a few months, they stuck to their deadline. And they came out with this groundbreaking commission report that documents all these conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and our federal agencies. And then they make 15 recommendations to get away from wireless for primary connectivity. Bring fiber optics to the premises and just hook up with Ethernet cables and adapters indoors. Label everything that is radiating at eye level, not buried in fine print, so that we know to stay away from these exposures. Get our federal agencies back onto investigating this. Train our building inspectors to be able to come in and do the assessment, how much radiation is in the area outside and what's going on with whatever might be inside. So this groundbreaking New Hampshire report is arguably the best document our country has today, highly credible. And doctors, scientists, engineers, state agencies all served on this commission, as did the industry. Now, in New Hampshire, the majority was in favor of this report that they were about to publish. And in New Hampshire, if there's anybody who's in a minority, they get the opportunity to publish a minority report. So after the summary, the executive summary and the majority report, there's a 10-page minority report, which is actually the industry playbook. There were 2 industry members on this commission and 1 senator who did not vote with the majority. 10 said, yes, we believe we've got a serious problem here. And these 3, 2 from industry and 1 Senator Gray, came up with this minority report, which is sort of a gift. It's the industry playbook. It's exactly what they tell our towns, our legislators. And at the back, Deb Hodgson had volunteered her time. She took minutes that were ratified after every meeting. And in the final meeting minutes, when they introduced the minority report, Senator Denise Ricciardi and Dr. Paul Heroux, who's one of the leading scientists from McGill, countered what's in that minority report. So it's all there if you know to look for it. And the industry kept saying, oh, we're going to give you the science. We're going to show that this is safe. End of the day, they never produced any because there isn't any. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire was the chair at the time of the Computer and Electrical Engineering Department, and he has worked on medical device development using radio frequency for many years of his career. He was appointed by the governor to serve on this commission and thought, well, this is going to be a slam dunk. Of course, Wi-Fi is fine. Well, Dr. Chamberlain started vetting the science, and this is not fringe science. He found that these are highly credible trade journals that have published these peer-reviewed studies, meaning that other experts on this topic reviewed the science and confirmed it was solid science. That's what a peer review does. So he has done a 20-minute presentation here explaining what the commission found, and then you can look at his slides to look at the evidence of harm and the science. So when they got their commission formed, their report out, the next step is to take their 15 recommendations and introduce new legislation to enact those recommendations. Well, every time they get some good bills put forward, and you can look at all of this, the industry shows up and starts talking about the economic benefits. And, it always comes down to follow the dollar. And then these legislators stop listening to the facts. And we have yet to get another bill passed in New Hampshire. But they've had a bill this session. Maine had one. Connecticut had some. Massachusetts. A lot of states are introducing all of this kind of legislation. But it's going to take years for public policy to catch up. And you can look at bills in many states through these links. And industry rolls into town with their applications to put this toxic stuff in. And they'll say, and don't worry about the NIMBYs. Those are just the not in my backyard folks who just don't want a cell tower near their house. It's not just the NIMBYs. Everybody is starting to talk about this throughout the country. There are more than 150 national groups that you can go look at either Americans for Responsible Technology. There's now a listing at Children's Health Defense. They have a whole team now working on radio frequency radiation. So you can look at these groups. And here in Massachusetts, for example, look at all these towns who have already updated their zoning code to protect especially their neighborhoods and their schools. Otherwise, the industry just rolls in, gets their applications rubber stamped, and before you know it, you can wind up with a cell tower right next to your home. So many, many towns are tuning in, and towns are taking actions to protect their citizens. In Burlington, we helped to educate there. They hired a special attorney, a special counsel who knows the land use laws and the telecom laws, but she also knew that you could legally put into a policy that the industry would have to come back every year and recertify that these antennas, these small cells, are still within the law. And they put in their policy that industry would have to pay for an independent consultant to come through and validate that they're still within the law. Well, the night that they ratified that small cell policy, the attorney for the Verizon folks was there. He said, well, my client does not wish to set precedent, knowing that they plan to put millions of these in all over the country, and they didn't want to have to pay a fee or come back every year. They just want to do the drop and run and be done with it. So the industry withdrew their small cell policy because Burlington did their homework and got policy put in place that industry could not do this there. Other towns saw what Burlington did and followed suit. So this is happening all over the country. Just recently, Stamford, Connecticut, there's a state representative, David Michelle, who has Stamford in his district, and he figured out that industry had gotten into the governor's ear and came up with a plan in Connecticut's 5 largest towns. They were going to start rolling out these toxic 5G small cell antennas inside neighborhoods at street level on poles at bedroom height. So a panel of experts was brought in to educate Stamford's city council equivalent. And they told the governor at the end of the day, no, governor, we don't want that deal you struck up with industry in our town. So with some good, high quality education, and now the whole presentation panel is available for you to share with your town. Easton, Connecticut, a grandmother figured out 5G, talked to her town. There was a doctor on their board. They put a moratorium up until it can be proven safe. They have re-upped that moratorium again in recent months. Hawaii County put a ban on 5G. It didn't have any legal legs, but it sure educated a lot of people. And this is happening all over the world. So go take a look, because it's not coming to you through mainstream media. I want to say a few things about our schools, which have become so toxic. Louisiana doctors got together and unanimously passed a law to start addressing this, start doing best practices for digital devices. Kids do not belong in front of screens. It's ruining their eyes. It's ruining their ability to interact with their environment and with others. So this is encouraging. The Netherlands and Finland have seen what a distraction devices are to the learning process, and they are removing them from the classrooms. Silicon Valley executives are sending their kids to schools with no tech, not hardwired, not wireless, no tech, and going so far as to having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens near their children. So solutions abound. Our friends at Americans who did Americans for Responsible Technology, they have also done this program called Safe Tech Schools. They've got a whole toolkit for you to help bring your schools up to speed. And if you contact them, they will send a packet out to your schools. Curriculum. Who knew? The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already put out kindergarten through grade 12 curriculum on prevention for cell phones and other wireless equipment. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight, who did that TED Talk on the smart meters, she brought me in and we partnered up and did 4 presentations throughout their professional development day on health and wellness. So we have content there we can share. Reach out. We are more than happy to come help in your schools. My little nonprofit, we're about to relaunch our little online course that could be completed in about a half an hour online. So we have all the training available. And our friends at Environmental Health Trust have a whole web page full of postcards and posters and all sorts of informative pieces of material that you can just download and go get printed. Maryland, they worked really hard with Maryland, and it became the first public health agency who oversees children. And they came up with a recommendation that our schools should be hardwired, and you can see their fact sheet. This goes on and on. We have the solutions, but we've got to get the education out there. The first medical school textbook is now out, thanks to Dr. Panagopoulos in Greece and his colleagues all over the world who wrote chapters. There's an amazing Physicians for Safe Technology website that our doctors, our nurses, our first responders, scientists, everybody can just go see this highly credible information. There's additional great information for our engineers, physicists, technologists. And again, you guys can go deeper into this dive when you get my slides in the next day or so. Home and work. If you're not a do-it-yourselfer and the idea of playing with wires again just makes you very uncomfortable, your electrician can be brought in to put Ethernet ports in, and then you just need to get the Ethernet cables and adapters. You can also hire professionals who are highly trained consultants from something called the Building Biology Institute. They come in and do testing for all the indoor pollutants, mold, VOCs, formaldehyde, water, and there are those who are certified in electromagnetic radiation specialty. So don't hesitate to bring in an expert. This award-winning film, Generation Zapped, is now available through our public libraries. The streaming services, Canopy and Hoopla, allow you to download this for free, or you can get it online. 74 minutes. It's a great way to highly credibly open this. This film was selected for the United Nations Film Festival, so it's got great accolades on it. So my hard lesson learned was don't go it alone. Don't think you're going to use your one little voice and go to your authorities and they're going to fix it. It's not the way public service works today. Very few public servants are public leaders, I've discovered. So get everybody around you educated first. And then as parents, as grandparents, as citizens who want safety, then as a group go, because one voice can get swept under the rug. Bert Wolf on PBS, he does his travel show. He's done 2 episodes with some of the experts, half-hour episodes. Watch those with your loved ones. And then here's this whole toolkit for you at Americans for Responsible Technology to show you how to get started. There may be groups there already who exist that you can join up, or they have advice for starting your own group. So don't go it alone. And then at the municipal level, we just have so many resources available once we get their attention on this. Again, we want to aim for as low as reasonably achievable. And when they do their investigation, they're welcome to go to my website for my page on municipal leaders. And again, you can get this through the resource page at Mass for Safe Tech. And always remember, don't go with industry priorities, go for what the public's priorities are. This free downloadable book online is called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. They go through a dozen different reasons of why fiber optics to the premises is so far superior to anything that wireless can deliver. And again, always measure not against our corrupted government radiation exposure limits, but against the biological limits. And those are spelled out with our friends at Safe Living Technologies. Okay, oops, here we go. Next steps. So we can't kid ourselves. There is no safe level of this man-made radiation. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who's now retired from the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, she was the leader there for many years. She was in charge of that national toxicology study. And she said, there's definitely some conflicts of interest at the federal level, but there are still some really good people at the federal level, but they need to be empowered by us to do their job. So we've got to build it at the grassroots up through the state level and push it up to the federal level. So let's keep educating. We are doing these webinars twice a month. You can always come join us, keep learning. I can be brought in. I can help you line up others to be brought in for townwide or regional forums. Here's a couple that we've done you can look at. And start where you are. Are you a parent? Let's get the other parents educated. Are you a nurse or a doctor? Do you work in high tech? Wherever you work, most companies, most have a professional organization they're affiliated with. They're always looking for public speakers for their quarterly or annual meetings. I would be honored to come in. Speaking is my happy place, educating, and I can certainly introduce you to other experts as well. So start where you are. And let's get townwide tech safety committees going, because nobody's looking at it and tech is not going away. So let's formally set up safety. Make sure our towns are wise to this and that they will always offer a no-fee opt-out on these meters until they can be hardwired to the premises and the radiation antennas removed. And then all of our schools, our libraries, our senior centers, our playing fields, every town building should be hardwired. And we need to strengthen our bylaws. And we have checklists and samples that can be used at Americans for Responsible Technology. And most of our town attorneys are not experts in telecom law, so our town should not be shy about hiring an expert like Burlington, Massachusetts did. Andrew Campanelli has worked on this for years. He used to work for industry, understands their playbook, and he now helps towns to rewrite their zoning code under the full extent of the law to protect yourself. Industry will tell you your hands are tied. Well, he'll tell you may have one finger tied, but there's many things that you can put in your zoning to make it so industry can't get into sensitive areas. So for like $8,500, which is small change, to come in and rewrite your zoning code. So for today, start looking around. I know your world is going to look a little differently after you first learn this, but just start working your way to hardwiring. Notice what's radiating. Start with baby steps. Be gentle with yourself and everybody around you, because we didn't know that we got ourselves into this trouble. Start by creating a sleep sanctuary. Give your body that opportunity to do its proper cell repair. Put everything in airplane mode, and then make your way to Ethernet cables and adapters and just leave those antennas off permanently. And then again, go out and use these resources, hang up flyers and stuff, use their checklist to see what do I need to do to keep my family safe. And thank you, everybody. You can access us through these links. Sidnee, who's our co-host tonight, has the EMF Safety Network, as well as Santa Rosa for Safe Technology, Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and you can email me directly here. And I will stop the screen share now, and thank you all for staying with us for 2 hours. We know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose, but once you know, you're halfway there, and we will help you to keep learning what you can do to have safe technology and still stay connected. So, Sidnee, were there any questions for us tonight?
Yes, there are several questions. And there was a request to stop the recording before the questions. Is that okay? Or do you usually record all the way through?
We prefer to leave the recording on because we send this out broadly and people want to be able to see what was discussed. If you have something private, please do email me and we'll get back to you that way. So we are going to keep recording during the Q&A.
Okay. And then there was another question from Johanna, but Raheen, you can still ask your question if you're comfortable being recorded. And then I also wanted to say that Johanna had a question about the Manchester by the Sea, the smart water meter opt-out. She's concerned about a smart water meter opt-out. So those are just the questions that I saw in the chat.
Okay, so we've had some funny business going on here in Ashland. I got a letter from the town Department of Public Works saying that they need to replace all of our water meters and that it's mandatory. So please call them and set up a time so they can get into my basement and swap out the water meter. And I had years ago gone down when they were first starting. They've been rolling these out in phases here in Ashland. And I took my meter, my radio frequency detection meter, down to our Department of Public Works. And I was given a little, field trip and a tour to show that they put these meters on, the water goes through the pipes, and when the water is flowing, it calculates how much water is being used, and that's how you get your bill. And then he showed me that the capture stops when the water's not flowing. And then he showed me a recycling bin that was full of all these little smart water meters that were being deployed out in the community, literally a bin that the guys were going to pick up and put on the truck and then go out into neighborhoods and start putting them on. So I put my meter down in the bin and it wasn't hooked up to anything. All these meters were just in there going transmit, 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 transmit. So they were radiating all the time, even before they were mounted on our homes. So I reached out to our Department of Public Works when I got that mandatory letter and I said, please share with me, where in the law does it say that this is mandatory? And they never got back to me. And I spoke to somebody else in our town administration about it, and he said, oh, just ignore it. And I went, okay, but I want to know, why do they think it's mandatory? And then there's a family out in another town in Massachusetts who's already removed their children from the radiation at school, and they've chosen to homeschool. So they're very careful with what they expose their family to. And they were notified that they were putting a smart water meter right in the sidewalk, right in front of their home, and they don't want it. So they've been trying to educate their town, and it's gotten pretty nasty out there. Their town got very hostile and threatened to charge them $100 a month if they didn't accept this thing. And, you know, that's just extortion at this point. Well, the mom, sent me an article showing that in Franklin, Massachusetts, a different town, it was found out by the State Ethics Commission that these water meter representatives were coming into our towns and taking our water meter or our water department administrators off on these boondoggles, taking them on these ski trips and picking up the tab for hotel rooms and food and beverages and skiing and all of this stuff. So they got fined in Franklin, Mass. The DPW director was fined $15,000 for breaking our code of ethics. Every state employee in Massachusetts has to take ethics training, and it is illegal to take anything more than $50 from any vendor, especially if you're in a purchasing position. So then it's still going on. In Natick, I heard the DPW director there also got fined $9,000, and there may be more coming. So this is kind of the same playbook that industry did back when they came in and rolled in with their cell towers and said, oh, you know, this great new technology. Well, they're using some pretty underhanded ways to get it in there, and we need to bring light to this. So for Manchester by the Sea, we need to get education forums going out there. We need to get citizens educated and get enough of them educated that they're not going to back down, and they're going to keep staying in front of your town boards until you guys get meaningful traction on this. So that's my advice there. Get the education out first and then go to the authorities. And don't let them in your house. Refuse. Okay. Rehaim, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
I can ask another question. I had two questions.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one of them I can email you, the other one, you know, like when you talk about like hardwiring our homes, you know, like sometimes as a home, we have different offices, like in terms of location. One is at the end of the other part of the home. The other one is like the other side. So how do you manage? Hold on.
Well,
I'm sorry. So how do you manage this when you do these kind of issues? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are the great questions, because if you want to take action, you need to know what you're going to do. So our router is down in the basement in a utility closet. But when our house was built, they had put Ethernet ports in the office that I'm sitting in here. We had an Ethernet port in the master bedroom, and we had an Ethernet port in the living room. So an electrician can, if you don't already have Ethernet ports in your house, and if you look around, you might discover they're sitting right there in the wall. Then you just get Ethernet cables and connect them, or an electrician can put an Ethernet port wherever you want in your house. So you just start plugging in, and if you need to get an Ethernet switch, you can plug in a bunch of devices with separate little cables. and one big cable going to your router. So it's not rocket science to fix, but you really do want to get a meter because you never know how many antennas are in there. So unless you measure each one of your devices and your router, you don't know if you've gotten it all. So you really need to measure. As I said earlier, people may go in together on one in a neighborhood or in a family or a group of friends, and then you just share it. Some people just buy it outright if they can afford to do that. Others will get one for their library, so it's a community resource, but measuring is really important. Okay, does that help?
Yeah, that is definitely helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. And I saw you had a little child with you, so bless you for learning and doing what you need to do to protect your
Thank
loved
you so much. And I am so close in the Boston area. And we came from Ohio last weekend just for a short-term visit.
Mhm.
And my husband said that we had sinus issues. His sinus issues came back when we get into Boston. I don't know. I was thinking, how can it be? So now when you show the amounts of the radiation comparing New Hampshire and Boston, I understand that.
Yeah, it's very, all of our big cities have become so electro-polluted. I will say though that we are in the middle of springtime here, so it could also be that the pollens are pretty thick in the air right now. But our
Right.
body only has so much energy with which to try and stay ahead and keep our immune system strong. And when we layer on all these different factors, everybody's different. And we all hit different tipping points at different times. So it could be a combination of those things when you were in Boston. Okay.
Thank you.
So I see a Kathy Ging has a question and then one Scott has a question.
Yeah,
So Kathy, I think had her hand up first, but then
Yep, go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Well, Cece, you did a great job as usual. I want to say that today, KEZI TV, Eugene, Oregon, ABC News did a second story on the smart meter mandatory finishing up the mop-up crew, as they're calling those of us who have resisted the digital meters. And now they are threatening. I just got an email today. I saw this on the TV newsletter that I got today from them, that they are going to turn off electricity. And if you go to I just put the whole story on the side of the chat, by the way, but if you go to the URL and you'll read at the very bottom there's a link to the first story that was 4/19, about a week ago, by a different reporter. And he was quoting a woman at the PR department at eWeb, and she says, well, these digital meters with the radio turned off are essentially the same as the analog meters. And so I worked with Mary, who you may know, in Virginia, to work on a statement and rebutting that statement. And eWeb is still acting intransigent. So I don't know, that there's 400 people that got these threatening letters, even from the lawyer, certified letters, saying that if you have your electricity turned off and then you want it turned on, well, it's $250, then you have to have the radio on with no option to have the radio turned off. So I referred to them as Gestapo, and then I wrote several Facebook posts. You can see my Facebook, Kathy Kathy Ging, Ging, to follow that thread, to say that they are the Gestapo, because the Gestapo not only went after older people, Jewish people, homosexuals, they also went after the disabled. And these people who are suffering in my community, who have implants in their teeth and brain these people are suffering already from their neighbor's smart meters. So this is the Armageddon moment in Eugene. If you have any advice, I'm game.
Oh, Kathy, I am so sorry. I don't have any advice other than to get the citizens activated and start showing up at local council meetings and stuff. Make it difficult for them to not listen to you guys.
We've been doing that every month since January, 4 months in a row. We even read a 15-minute speech. 5 people read it. I mean, anybody who's interested in the eWeb game, go to Eugene Water and Electric Board.
Yeah. You know what, Kathy? Are you in touch with Children's Health Defense?
Oh, yeah, yeah, we definitely are. Yeah.
Okay, because they've been running it through their legal advisors. And I think they are getting close to the point where they're gonna start taking on smart meter cases. They'll have to meet specific criteria, but make sure that you're in charge with Miriam, because maybe you guys will be one of the case studies that they can look at and think about bringing a lawsuit.
We already spent a few $1,000s on a local attorney who's possibly going to line up with those people. Thank you. Yeah.
Good, good, good. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. All right.
Scott's the next one, and I know we wanted to stop, but I just had one more. I'm sorry.
No. I'm happy to keep going. And I think that Steve Drury from Mass Vocals is also wanting to say something before we
Good.
go.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So Scott,
Okay. Hey, thank you so much. I made a comment a couple weeks ago on your YouTube channel, and YouTube deleted it. And you contacted me this morning, so I'm very appreciative of everything you've done. It's just amazing. I had 2 comments, and then I had a question. And I fell asleep through part of it because the Wi-Fi is just killing me so bad. It just knocks me out. So I'm trying to work through it. But what I found is you can go to your phone, and I'll just show you my other phone here, but you can go to your phone and you can go to the Wi-Fi connections and actually click off the 5G and put it on 2G. I don't know if you said that or not. Some carriers allow you to do that. And so I did that. And then I went into my carrier, like you said, and I shut off all the antennas, the 5 antennas. And that's helped me a ton. So I'm really appreciative of that. I guess I had 2 questions. The first one is do those power saver energy plugins that you plug in inside your house next to your electrical meter outside, do those things work at blocking the electrical energy in your house?
I'm not qualified to answer that one. You'd be better off speaking to a building biologist.
Okay.
Or have you come across Jeremy Johnson's work yet?
No, I found you on YouTube. I run a channel on YouTube, and so I found you, but no, I haven't.
Okay, so write this down, emfanalysis.com. That's Jeremy Johnson's website, and he's the Silicon Valley engineer who got so sick from the smart meters. So he knows this stuff really well. He does consultations online. You can, ask questions or, book some time with him. He will be a really good one to ask. And then you can also go to the Building Biology Institute, and you may be able to find a building biologist in your area, or a lot of them do work remotely too. So
Yeah, you sent me that, and I found a lady right here in Boise, Idaho, where I live. What was it again? EMF. What was it again? EMF
analysis.
analysis. Okay. Yeah.
and
So, EMF analysis. Okay, I got that down. I'm not used to typing with my left hand, but so the other question I had is, so I'm just going to show you, I haven't been living in this house. It's my grandfather's house I've been going back and forth from LA, and my router I'm literally sitting on my bed, but my router's right there.
Oh,
I mean,
geez.
it is 5-10 feet from my bed. I did plug it in, and I don't know if you went over this or not, but I did plug it in. You can see behind it, I plugged it into a surge protector. So I do shut it off at night, and man, that has helped a lot.
Yeah.
But is there anything I can do right away? I mean, I do want to go get the Ethernet and do what you said, call my company and shut all that off. Is there anything I can do?
Yeah, when you go out to Jeremy's website, he also has some shielding products that he recommends. You can literally buy a piece of shielded fabric and wrap that thing up. Some signal will still get out, but it will reduce it greatly. And he also has a specific router that's recommended. It's a JR-ESCO or something like that, that goes into eco mode when it's not actively being used. So yeah, I think you'll appreciate going to Jeremy's website. Sidney.
So that's emfanalysis.com.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
Also, I recommend also the, you go to lessemf.com and you can purchase a signal tamer. And basically it's just a pouch. It's like a screen, like it looks like a screen, like a very cloth screen, and you just wrap the whole router in it, and it cuts down 90%. So I just recommended that to a friend who was working in a classroom who was getting sick from the router. And she has wrapped the signal tamer around the router in the classroom. And she has, it cuts it down by 90%.
Awesome.
Wow, that's great. Lessemf.com. Thank you so much. Yeah. I've been running a YouTube channel for like 7 months. And so I spend a lot more time on my phone. And it's kind of like, that's where I started getting the problems. But they put I told you on YouTube, it was at least 2 or 3 weeks ago, because they took my comment off, that they put a tower right outside my house when I was down in LA. And then when they put it up, that's when I started feeling sick. I was doing this parasite cleanse, and I thought, oh, it's just the parasite cleanse. But no, it was this huge tower. And then they tried to put one up. I own like 1.25 acres. They tried to put another one up right on the corner of my property on the other end, like less than like 500 feet away, 1,000 feet away. So I told all my neighbors, oh, these people are nuts. And so, and I knew I haven't been carrying my phone on with me for like probably about 7 or 8 years when I drive around in my car, and I mean, because I knew I've been a tennis pro my whole life. I've been really, I knew that this stuff was bad, but we got that one shut down. But this one that they put up, they did all this digging on my property. They didn't ask me. I'm going to call them up and say, you did all this work on my property without asking me, and see if I can get rid of it. I probably can't. But I went to that antenna search.
Yeah.
I have like 244 antennas in a 3-mile radius and 74 towers in my 3-mile radius of my house.
Yeah. Well, that's not all that uncommon these days. It's crazy, but it's not uncommon.
I couldn't believe it when I saw that, because there was no way. I live quite a ways outside of town, but there's homes all around, but they've just put up so much, like you said. And when I was in
they're
LA,
just building out more capacity to sell more product and services. So we just need to keep educating and do our best. Scott, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'll send you an email on some other stuff that I think will really help you a lot. I mean, you're already amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cece, can I just say, this is Kathy again,
Sure.
that Bill Bathgate called me from Michigan. He's been fighting smart meters in several states. He's an electronics engineer. He told me that he's been testing filters for the last 5 years, and there's only 2, quote unquote, that work. But the one that he sells is raised the price to $2,100 from $2,000. And what Mary said in Virginia is the one that is more expensive than just maybe the plain sine wave tamer is supposed to do better protection. So it looks like this is going to be a social justice issue. The people who can afford to put the $2,100 on their credit card. The one thing that I don't know, and I'm not representing anything, I'm just quoting what he told me and Mary, is that whether this will also protect from 5G or whether it just protects from the EMF, the EMR, the microwaves, the dirty electricity. So
I think the filters are more of the dirty electricity, right, Sidney?
Yes. Yeah, they don't do anything for the dirty electricity can be a huge problem. Just as bad for sensitive people, just as bad as the Wi-Fi. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Kathy. Steve, did you want to ask a question?
Hear me? Can you
Go
hear?
for it.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. All right. So I have a couple of questions. First of all, the Boston Bill 2152 from Moore's office has been pushed to May. I think it's either May 2nd or 1st or the 10th. And that's the protection for smart meter ratepayers. And the other legislation is kind of behind it, but the problem is that without that legislation, and it's about to die in the telecommunication committee, where else would it die? It continues to be put through and die in that committee, and it's just, we're kind of,
In the past, Steve, they have actually voted the smart meter opt-out bill out of committee favorably, but then it goes to the next committee like Senate Rules or Ways and Means, and then it dies there. So I don't hold my breath, although they did put an emergency preamble on that smart meter opt-out bill this session. Maybe they'll do something. But in the coming weeks, we'll see if we can do another push on that bill.
I have a question
Yeah.
or suggestion that you are dealing with lots of people that have faced the same situation as us. I mean, we were forced by the municipality, as I told you before, and just to educate other people that they wanted to take our house. They were going to take our house for the price of $125 through tax title taking, because we refused to give them the money. And we were forced to give it to them under duress. But, you know, we have a 3-year period to go into court, and that's not all they've done. I mean, they've done all kinds of different things to us, and everything that they've done to these people about, you know, telling our electricity off and water meters as well. The problematic situation is we do need a lawsuit. And I think you have the ability with all these different people. We need to coagulate and get together, and then we need to go and force a lawsuit against these, and in general, the whole business, for all of them.
Well, that's what it looks like. So they have to, when they first start doing litigation on this, you can't go after the whole big kahuna at once, right? You got to do some test lawsuits to see what's going to stick in the legal system and what's going to go through. So again, there's no cavalry coming. The legal stuff takes time, and it has to be done in a measured fashion. But the good news is, Steve, that is starting to happen, and they're going to be putting out a call for test cases, hopefully in the coming weeks or months, on smart meters.
Me about going after them all in one big kahuna. What I'm trying to say to us is that we are the complainants.
Right.
And we can call on each other, in particular to the one companies that we face in our districts, and we can spawn on what's going on. And if a jury was ever to hear these things, then they can make legitimate decisions about the evidence and what's going on. I mean, this is an emergency situation, just like the bill said.
I know. Yeah, we're doing everything we can think of, Steve. If you are able to come up with another plan, you just let us know. But everybody is working really hard on this. So thank you. It was nice having you back again tonight.
All right, thank you.
All right, everybody. Sidney, have we answered all the questions that we had?
I think so, and we've been doing this for 2.5 hours. It's been awesome.
Oh, goodness. Well, you're a trooper. Thanks for sticking with us here. Thank you, everybody, and do your best to have a tech-safe rest of your day. We'll be in touch soon. We'll send this out in the next day or so.
And the slides too, the slides, it's so
Yes.
great that you make the slides available, because there's so many great links that are easy to find. So thank you. We'll all get those.
Anything we've learned over the last 10 years can help you connect the dots faster, then we're happy to help with that.
You are the wise women. Night, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.